at what is an annual review, all the different sort of words that are used around it, you know, early, interim, emergency, and what that means. We'll look at how a review is structured or should be structured, the timescales around that, parent carers and young people's contributions, how to put that together, what to include. We'll look at the meeting itself and the recommendations that can come from the local authority's duties around that. This presentation, I wanted to look a bit more at phase transfer stage, particularly with moving up to secondary school. So, you know, any questions around that, do jump in. And then about how SENDIASS can help, what we can do. So if we look at what is an annual review, I mean, I've got 2 children with EHC plans myself, and I have to be honest and say I always thought the annual review was the meeting, but it's not. It's part of a process. So all children and young people who have an EHC plan, it will be reviewed at least once a year by the local authority. And that's not like it would be nice if it's reviewed. It has to be reviewed at least once a year. So the review is the process of looking at how the needs and the provision within the EHC plan, if that's still relevant, if it still accurately describes the child or young person, if there's any changes that needs to be made with that, this is the mechanism to make those changes. So annual reviews are typically outcomes focused, which is section E in the plan. Looking at those outcomes, looking to see if the child or young person is making progress towards them. And if they're not, why not? Is more provision required? Or on the other hand, if they are and those outcomes have been met, great. Do we need more outcomes now? So interim or early reviews, I mean, there's lots of different reasons why a review could happen sooner than that year deadline, because it is at least once a year. It can be more frequent than that. So that may happen if you know, the previous annual review, you know, the people involved could see that it needed to be reviewed more regularly than 12 months. It could be that, you know, things are breaking down with the placement. There are suspensions, there is you know, issues around attendance. All of those sorts of reasons might be a good time to get everyone involved with the child together around a table to look at the plan and whether it's still meeting needs. Another example would be if the child or young person has needs that everyone knows they change rapidly. What you're seeing in April of one year could be very different from in October, and with that in mind, it's important to be looking at it regularly. So looking at how the review is structured, it's the local authority's duty to do the annual review. It's not for parents to worry about, but if you know that it's not being done in time, absolutely flag it up. But just wanted to be clear that it's not something for you to put in your calendar. It is the local authority that has to organise it. And they typically delegate this duty to educational settings like schools to hold the reviews for them. So they send them the list of children and young people who need the review that term. And the review itself is divided into 4 parts, really. So there's the collection and sharing of information beforehand. There's the meeting itself. There's the report. I've put head teacher's report, but it's not always the head teacher. So the school's report of the meeting, which comes 2 weeks after the meeting itself, and then the point where the local authority reviews that paperwork and makes a decision, and that should come 4 weeks after the meeting. So with that in mind, thinking about timescales, the first review should always be within 12 months from the date when the plan was first issued. Any subsequent reviews should be 12 months from that review. So there's never more than 12 months where it's not being looked at. If the plan is amended for whatever reason, it should be reviewed within 12 months of the original EHC plan or the previous review, not the date of the amended EHC plan. And there is a recommendation in the Code of Practice that children aged up to 5, so early years, year R, settings should consider reviewing it every 3 to 6 months, just because there is that developmental, 3 to 6 months for a child that age, you can see real changes compared to someone perhaps a lot older. So it is worth thinking about if you do have a child in early years.
Kia,
Yeah.
it's Rachel here. Can I just ask a question that might be relevant to some of our parent carers? What happens in situations whereby you might have raised an appeal against the issue of an EHCP, perhaps you're not happy with the content, and that therefore almost sort of delays what would be the traditional effective date? What happens in those situations? Do you still take the date that it was issued, even if you're not agreeing to it? Does that become the pin in the calendar?
Yeah, it does. So it's not uncommon for, while you're waiting for your hearing to come up, the annual review might fall within that time.
Yeah.
And you should absolutely still have the annual review. And I know it seems counterintuitive because you're not agreeing with it.
Yes.
And school or SEN might have their view, which doesn't match up with yours, but it still has to be reviewed. Even if you are working through a working document, looking at it regularly.
Yeah, that was where the question was coming from, because actually, yeah, there was a parent care recently that was facing that time scale, but the advice and guidance is to still go ahead with that, even if you're in dispute around the content.
Yeah, so even if it is like a paper exercise where everyone knows what everyone's going to say, it still has to be sort of formalized and done that way.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Thank you.
So yeah, thinking about the meeting itself, is who has to be invited. I wish I'd put child young person first, because it's their plan, it's their meeting. So they should be inviting them. Obviously it's dependent on their needs and how they're able to do that, but I do think it makes such a difference when children and young people can participate, even if they just come in for like 2 minutes at the start or at the end, just to say what they think. Even if they come in and say, I hate school, it's rubbish, that's important for SEN to hear. Parents and carers have to be invited. It's typically the school that runs the meeting. The local authority are invited. They don't always attend. You can request that they attend. It's particularly helpful to do that if you're looking at a change of placement or something that you think, I would like SEN to be there to hear it from me. It's definitely worth asking for in those situations. And they do try and get to them. They usually by like Teams or Zoom, but they will try and come to those. And then anyone else who's sort of directly involved with the child or young person. So it could be like someone from health or social care. So if there's a social worker, they would typically come, or a specific health service, like maybe, or like a specialist teacher advisory service, they might come. And just anyone else involved with the child in whatever way to do with their education, it's helpful for them to come. So before the meeting, the school would send out, asking for contributions from parents, child or young person, child's teachers, and all the other people I just mentioned. And the idea is everyone gets that information in advance, so that you get it sort of 2 weeks before the meeting. Everyone knows what's going to come up in the meeting. There's no horrible surprises when you get in there. You'll be able to read what school thinks, school will be able to read what you think. So everyone is in theory on the same page with that. So thinking about parents' contributions, I always think it's important to remember Section 19 principles. You know, the views, wishes and feelings of children and young people and parents and carers, they are really important. And it's really important that, you know, you're able to participate in the annual review. Make sure you have the information and support you need to be able to do this, so that, you know, if you are confused about what the annual review actually is, that school can help you understand that. And, you know, the support to help the young person achieve all of their outcomes and to prepare them well for adulthood. So it's important to bear those things in mind when you're doing your contributions. I would say do it in whatever format works for you and your child or young person. I mean, you could send in a video, you could send in photos, you know, perhaps of something that your child's done. Because of, you know, for whatever reason, that's not a problem at all. SEN are used to receiving information that way. Any new reports would be really helpful to include, because that will, you know, EHC plans are evidence-based. So if you do want changes to be made to the plan, they're going to be looking at the evidence and where that's come from. I would always say to consider, you know, just to do bullet points really of what's working, what's not working, what you would like to change. I think those are the three main things to think about. I'd also say, you know, this is an opportunity to request a personal budget if that's something that you're interested in. And also change of placement. If you want to change of placement and your child or young person has an EHC plan, doing it through an annual review is the way to do it. So the meeting itself, you've got the head or the SENCO would be chairing it, and they'd be looking at, from the information that everyone provided in advance, they'd need to consider pupils' views, parents' views, overall progress, and then looking at the outcomes in the plan. What is the progress towards those? That is different to the academic attainment. They are different things. I would also expect an annual review meeting to look at successes. It absolutely shouldn't be, you know, a negative experience. It should be, even if things are challenging between, you know, how the child or young person is coping at school, I would still expect school to highlight successes as well. And it's an opportunity to look at any changes in circumstances or needs, or if some new equipment or anything like that is needed. This is a great opportunity to get that together. So after the meeting itself, the school has to send a written report to the local authority within 2 weeks, and they should be sending that to parents as well. In fact, everyone, I think, who contributed would typically receive a copy of that. Check it before it's sent to the local authority, because you might not agree with the school's account of what took place in the meeting. It doesn't mean the school will change what they've written, but there is usually a place on there where they can note any differences of opinion on that score. So we've gone 2 weeks after the school's sent theirs in, another 2 weeks after, so 4 weeks after the meeting, the local authority has to provide you with their decision on what they're going to do with the plan. So they will either maintain it, which means keep it as it is, amend it, which means make some changes, cease to maintain it, which means stop the EHC plan, or they will start a new assessment. So yeah, that has to be, you know, given to the parents or the young person within 4 weeks of the meeting. I would really, really recommend that when you have the meeting, put 4 weeks in your calendar, because this letter will give you the right of appeal. It is a legal duty that they have to complete. They have to give you this decision letter, and Without that decision letter, you will not be able to lodge an appeal at tribunal if that's something you choose to do. Okay, so there are, there's certain information they're meant to include on it, information about tribunal, mediation, SENDIASS, our details should be on there as well. But it is really important that you do get that, because we often hear from parents, oh, but they said they're consulting schools still. They can continue to do that, and they can give you that decision letter, because without that, you will not have a right of appeal. So looking at transferring between phases of education, this is important when thinking about when to hold that annual review meeting. So I hope I've made this clear, but it possibly isn't. In that first block, you've got all sorts of transfers. So early years school, infants to juniors, juniors to secondary, primary to secondary. They all need to be completed by the 15th of February. And I think sometimes we hear from parents saying, oh, school said as long as we have the annual review by the 15th of February, we'll be fine. But it has to all be done before then. So, that is something to bear in mind. There are the other school to post 16, 31st of March, which is actually really soon, thinking about it. And post 16 to post 16, again, is a different deadline itself. Thinking about year 6 phase transfers, as I was saying, when to hold one, there has to be an annual review before a new phase of education, where the child or young person is moving from, for example, primary to secondary. There always has to be an annual review. I think I've taken year 6 as an example. I think this would have to be held in the autumn term of year 6 at the latest. I mean, a lot of schools would have them at the end of summer term. And this means like if you've just had your annual review, you don't have to wait a year. You can have it a bit earlier, just to make sure that you're having this conversation with school and SEN about placement. If it's held in the autumn term, it means the local authority has enough time to comply with all those timescales we just went through, so that schools can be consulted and they can make a decision about placement for year 7.
Kia,
Yeah.
sorry to interject. I'm just thinking about our parent carers that perhaps have not got an HCP, but maybe they're in primary setting and they're making that realisation either through their own observation or through SENCO feedback that the individual or the child, young person might not be able to cope in a mainstream secondary. So actually they're thinking about that setting probably a little bit before year 6, so they haven't actually got an HCP. Would you always recommend to start that process even earlier for those that don't have an HCP, that are trying to get an HCP but also coming up to phase transfer, so kind of maybe looking at, say, like year 4 onwards in terms of what settings there are, just because of the tight timescales?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, to be honest. I think it's hard to say, because I would expect there to be a lot of support in place already before going to looking for an EHC needs assessment, or at least asking school, what more can you do to help? This isn't working. But I think what you've suggested about visiting schools is actually really important. It makes such a difference being able to be in the setting and see the other children there. And I think you can see if your child would fit in or not. And that can have a big difference on, thinking about how they're going to cope in secondary school.
Definitely. And I think it's almost, about being able to empower people that they have parental preference, because that's obviously part of the code of conduct, that they have parental preference over the setting. So I know from speaking to a lot of parent carers that have almost, gone through a process where they're being told which schools are being consulted, but actually what we know is that that's very much should be parent carer led. So that, if you're wanting to consult a particular school that perhaps the local authority haven't done, that you bring that to their attention, as opposed to, I guess, being a passive
Yeah. Oh,
kind of passenger on
yeah,
that journey.
definitely.
Yeah,
If you request that they consult a setting, um, they have to consult it. I mean, I think it's, unless it's a wholly independent school, then they don't have to do it, but they typically would anyway, I think. But you're right, it's always worth chasing that up to make sure your preference has been listed.
I've got a quick question just to come in when we were talking about the timing of annual review and how that might buffer up against other sort of milestones. We've got a question here is from a parent carer. The child is due to start a new placement in September, so a new specialist placement in September, but the annual review is due in September. Should they be having an annual review with the current setting now ahead of that, or should they be waiting until September when they start?
It might be more beneficial to have it with the current setting, but you could invite the new setting to attend, and that might be a good way of coming up with like a transitional plan.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah,
Like a
and I
co-bridge.
think if the placement's agreed, that there shouldn't be a problem with them attending. They will probably want to come, because it will give them an even more up-to-date idea of what the child is like and what they need. And yeah.
So just to clarify, the current school would be owning that process, but inviting the new setting, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic. I've got a couple of other questions. Are you right to,
Hit me.
to give you a break for a moment?
That's all right.
In talking. But yes, we've got some other questions here. How does a parent care initiate a review? The implication of your last slide is that reviews need to have been completed by February, but the local authority won't initiate a review until the annual review is due. So I guess this is relating more to phase transfer.
Yeah, okay.
So how does a parent initiate that review?
You can ask the school in the first instance and say, it's because I want this earlier because it's a phase transfer. I understand everything has to be done and completed before the 15th of February. Therefore, it has to be done autumn or summer. And if school is still pushing back and saying, no, this isn't how we do things, or that's not necessary, you can ask SEN and say, I want an earlier annual review than scheduled because it's a phase transfer. And they should facilitate that.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully that's answered your question for the person that raised that one. If not, just let us know. Really good observation here. So we've got a parent carer here that says lots of specialist settings will not let you go and visit them unless you've got an EHCP or a draft EHCP. It's really difficult to be able to actually go and see whether that would be appropriate. I've got one area of advice that I can give, but I don't know if there's something you want to say about that, Keir, in terms of what you'd recommend.
I mean, yeah, it's a real tough one. You are sort of you need the EHC plan, but yeah, it's a really, really tough situation. I think a lot of schools put online tours on their websites during COVID. I don't know how helpful that is because they often don't have the children in them.
Yeah.
What was your suggestion?
Well, one thing that I would recommend, I'm not saying it would always work, but is if you have a SEN officer, so if you know who your SEN or caseworker is at the local authority, that maybe you can ask them to consult that school on your behalf, or at least send them a communication. If you know who the contact details are of a particular school, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but even if it's just a one-line email from the caseworker saying that, you know, the HCP is going to be issued, but it's being drafted, just something that gives that setting a slightly, you know, I guess clearer view of the fact that this is, you know, this isn't just speculative looking around. I mean, I guess I can understand it from a specialist settings perspective. They want to try and keep things, you know, calm and continuity for those children that are there. It's kind of chicken and egg though, isn't it? We need to know whether that's the right setting.
That's the phrase I was looking for.
Yeah. So I would, you know, try and maybe use that relationship that you may have or not have with your case officer and just say that you'd really like to be able to see a certain school, could they consult with them on your behalf or create almost an access sort of pathway for you to be able to go and have a conversation, or at least go into the setting?
Yeah, I've been speaking to a few special schools recently about arranging visits for parents, and I do think things are changing compared to, you know, completely shutting the doors with COVID and saying we can't. A lot of them seem to have, you know, appointments you might have to book a couple of months in advance, but I do think they are
Yeah,
opening up a little bit more than they were.
yeah. I mean, some of it's about if they've got waiting lists, they don't want to kind of raise false expectations for parents or young people. So that's kind of understandable. We've got a question here from Parent Carer. Should annual review for phase transfer at age 16, which is, I think, the date's 31st of March, you said, happen in the autumn term too? So should annual review for phase transfer at age 16 happen in the autumn term too?
I mean, it can't. I think it probably should. I guess you've got that extra, what is it, 6 weeks compared to the other phase transfers. But in terms of you know, just getting it clear with SEN what you're asking for and why, and that can only be a good thing. And particularly with getting your young person's name in front of the college that you want them to go to, if you've got all the information there done, you've had a really, you know, good annual review where everything's come together and it's all looking great.
Yeah.
And they've got that in advance. And
Yeah.
then I think that could only be to an advantage rather than leaving it. Just because, you know, with things like placement, there are panels, there's all sorts of internal mechanisms that also have to be factored into this
Absolutely.
timekeeping. So
Absolutely.
I would say so.
Thank you. And just for those that are wanting to know what a panel is a mechanism that the local authority use internally. So we're not part of it. They are a group of decision makers in the local authority that will decide whether or not funding could be allocated for a specialist setting. So whether or not that financial approval can be given and whether that child can be placed there. And the diary or the calendar of those panels is not visible to us. So we have to make sure that there is kind of enough time there. One thing I would say, just based on experience of other parent carers, I know that post-16 placements or phase transfers are more tricky. When I say tricky, the sort of, I guess, the options are quite limited in terms of, you think about colleges or other settings. So I know that post-16 sort of exploring options can be more time consuming. So absolutely, the more time you've got to do that, the better. The more prepared you are, the better. It's definitely going to help you. I've got one more question, but did you want to carry on? I'll come back to that. Do you want to?
Are you sure? There's not too much left, don't worry.
Fantastic. I will come back to that question that's just been sent through to me that I haven't yet answered. So yeah, hold that thought.
Okie dokie. Right, so what to consider at the annual review. And this is relevant for all phase transfers, I think. Thinking about what would be different in the new setting for your child or young person. Different environment, different amounts of people, how they'd have to organise themselves if they have to go from class to class rather than staying in the one classroom all the day. Things like that are really important to think about in terms of their needs and what sort of provision is available and what can be put in place for them there. I think it's also a really good time to think about if the plan actually describes their current provision, so what they're currently getting from the school. So it could be, for example, I don't know, they've increased the ELSA support, and they've just been doing that because they can see it's what your child needs, and that's brilliant, but it's important that that is in the plan, because otherwise they will go to secondary school, they'll look at the plan and say, well, you only need 1 hour of ELSA, not 2, so we're giving you 1 hour of ELSA. If you can, and I know it is hard, go to the annual review with a clear idea of the school you want to name as your parental preference and why. as we've already talked about, parents do have really strong rights in naming their preference. But I think if you can give some reasons as well, that's only going to boost your preference there. You can ask the SENCO of the secondary school you want to attend the meeting. It may be that they say, oh, we can't be going, we've got loads of kids who want to come to our school, which is understandable, but sometimes they might come. I think if they can't, a really good time to talk to them about your child is at the like the school open days. So for my daughter's open day, I went and found the SENCO and talked about her, and I think it just helps get them on their radar, and you can ask them those questions directly. Could you do this? Is this something you do for other children with similar needs? And they'll give you that honest answer straight to your face, without sort of having SEN as the middle person, if you like. So I think that can be really helpful. And then after it, it's very similar to all annual reviews, really. I mean, they will amend the EHC plan, so you will get an amended final plan. It will be a new plan, and it will name a new school from the autumn term of year 7. So it will say their current setting, and then underneath it will say from September of whatever year it is, they'll be attending which school. And as I've said, it has to be done by the 15th of February, and that's the calendar year before they start secondary school. So the idea behind that is that should give enough time for a tribunal appeal if one is needed. I won't go through it again. This is a summary of it all. I'll share my slides. You can look at it at your leisure. And I also have this, but I don't know if that's actually more complicated than it needs to be. It was to try and show the timescales. So the whole process, as you can see, takes 14 weeks from start to finish. Mm-hmm. So there we are. So it's a legal process that the local authority has to follow. It's not optional. They have to do it every year at least. It's an opportunity for you to make changes to your child or young person's plan. It is evidence-based. So if school is sort of saying, I mean, this is just an example, but if school is saying we don't think they need any support anymore, that has to be evidence. They can't just remove things. SEM will not remove things unless there is evidence. If you don't agree with what the local authority decide after an annual review, you will have a right of appeal. And yes, come and talk to us if you need any help.